particularly assisting them in accessing government benefits such as SSI or vocational rehab services, and some housing and food stamp sort of supports, Medicaid, and income programs such as SSI and SSDI. So I have both lived this as a parent as well as helped numerous families of children, often who are relatively high functioning, like kids with X and Y chromosome variations. I'm not going to go over what transition to adulthood is, because the speaker from Nemours Children's Hospital did a very good job of summarizing transition. For our population, transition often takes longer than it takes with a typically developing child, with a child who doesn't have an extra X or Y chromosome. And one of the things about the variation in functioning levels of children and adolescents, young adults with X and Y chromosome variations, is that it's very, very difficult to predict when they are in high school how completely they're going to be able to transition to independence. So oftentimes I tell parents what you really need to do is to educate yourself about services that you may need in order to get your child all the way to as much independence as possible. You may not need to use those services, but keep them in your back pocket and make sure that you preserve your ability to apply for those services, so that you don't, say, close out the ability to use them if in fact a child is really struggling through their 20s and you can tell that they may not be able to be self-supporting, because that's one of the dilemmas of having a child with an X or Y chromosome variation. I won't go over the changes, except to emphasize again that one of the things parents need to understand is that as soon as the child graduates from high school, which will be any time between 18 and 21, they're going to go from the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act, where they are entitled to various services to do with education and vocational training, to the Americans with Disabilities, where they are eligible for services, but it's going to depend on them and on you to have all of the documentation that you need in order to support and apply for these services. So I'm going to talk not so much about post-secondary education as I am about the government programs like SSI, SSDI, and then the food stamps, Medicaid, Section 8 housing supplements, independent living centers, and also vocational rehab, which even our very high functioning members often have to take advantage of. One of the challenges with X and Y chromosome variations is that there's a developmental delay. There's not necessarily a lifelong developmental disability. So what you need to do is to set up a system that can provide additional supports after graduation from high school and through the process of getting established in a career. It often takes longer for these kids to become independent adults than for their siblings, for instance. And one of the things about the special education system is that they're so accustomed to dealing with disabilities that they understand more, disabilities that are much more obvious because of, you know, physical signs, dysmorphia. These guys tend to be very, very tall and very good looking. And so the school district will often say, well, you know, he's got learning disabilities, but he's pretty high functioning, and you're not going to be eligible for any of those services. Also, the services that they tend to think about are things that will apply to much lower functioning children than the typical XY variation person. They're not at all familiar with these disabilities, and they can't figure out exactly where they want to place somebody with Trisomy X or XYY or Klinefelter syndrome. So as I said, the challenge for the parent is that you have to institute effective planning, because the school district is not going to be able to assist you a great deal in identifying the services that your young adult may need. One of the things, if you happen to be an adult and you're sitting in this presentation, you may be much more, you may have had a rough transition to independence. You're not sure exactly what sorts of services you're going to need. In addition to your family, what you should do is try to find somebody who can help you with assessing your strengths and your functioning deficits. You can go to vocational rehabilitation services, because they can often help you with the educational testing that you need, the neuropsych testing. You can go to mental health professionals. You can access some of these services and find out more about them through what are called independent living centers. Independent living centers are federally funded. They're in every state, and there often will be an independent living center in a region near you. So if you're wondering about the range of services that you might be able to use, you can try going to an independent living center and consult with what's called there are these benefits consultants there. There are special needs life coaches. Increasingly, if you can find a good one, they may be able to help steer you to services. And then also therapists should be able to do that, but again, we don't find a lot of therapists who know a great deal about X and Y chromosome variations. I believe the previous talk about transition to independence to adult services talked about preserving your rights to entitlements. And one of the things that you need to do is to understand that if you are applying for certain services that are supported by either Medicaid or by or if you're going to be applying for services like supplemental security income, which is known as SSI, or SSDI, which is Social Security disability income. And you don't have to worry about the difference between those two income streams, because Social Security Administration takes care of the applications and the application and the assignment to which one you're eligible for. But one of the things that you need to realize is that most of these services, such as Medicaid and SSI, will require that you have no more than $2,000 in the child's, in assets in the child's name. So as early as the age of 15, if you already have, say, or if you know that grandma is holding on to $20,000 for college for your child, what you want to make certain of is that that money doesn't go into the individual's own name, because if it does, it will make your child ineligible for Medicaid waiver services, and it will also make him or her ineligible for SSI, although not SSDI. But in general, I tell parents that it's a good idea to place those funds into what's called a supplemental needs trust. And then we also have something that is a lot less expensive to set up these days and is more accessible. Those are called ABLE accounts, and those are accounts that can be set up for people with disabilities, and they can have up to $100,000 in the ABLE account. They can use it for education, for medical purposes, for a number of qualified expenses. But you want to get the money out of your child's name directly and either into a supplemental needs trust or into an ABLE account.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is ABLE an acronym for something?
It is an acronym, and right now I'm blanking on exactly what it is. But if you Google ABLE account, they were set up under federal law so that people with disabilities would be able to save up to $14,000 a year and have direct access to those funds rather than going through a trust. Yeah.
My daughter are 16, I see you have importance of establishing a trust by age 15.
Don't worry if you haven't, if you haven't done the trust already. I recommend that parents set up one of those trusts by the time a child is 18, but it's not too late if you set one up when, when the child is 20. The one thing that you want to make certain of if you are setting up a supplemental needs trust is that you use a very specialized attorney. Don't use your sister-in-law, the attorney, because she is free. You want to use somebody who specializes in trusts and estates and elder care and disability law, because I have certainly worked with families who have had a non-specialized attorney set up the trust, and they've used the wrong language, and it's what happens then is that the person, their child can be disallowed from certain services for a period of year while the trust is being resubmitted to the state.
Is there a need for a supplemental needs trust if your child has less than $200,000, or does it have anywhere near that?
No, you can, in a supplemental needs trust, you can have nothing. You can have it set up, waiting for when, set up and waiting for when there are assets in it. You can also, it's also very important that parents have a will. If you don't have a will currently, you need to go to an attorney and you need to set up a will. And the importance of doing that is that should you be riding on a plane, the plane falls out of the sky, and the child suddenly inherits your estate. If they inherit it in your own name, in their own name, they can be cut off again from any services that they happen to be applying for or receiving. And that will happen for a year while somebody works with an attorney to set up another type of trust to make them eligible. So you should have a will, and if you don't already have a supplemental needs trust, the will automatically create a supplemental needs trust on the death of a parent. And then, so the money will go into that supplemental needs trust, and it will maintain eligibility for services. Another thing that is very important in terms of accessing any government service later, is that you keep very good medical records. If everything is kind of stuffed in a number of drawers, one of the things that you might do on a work holiday is, or put aside a weekend day, gather that material, organize it into notebooks, because it's much, much easier when you need to pull things out. For instance, one of the things that, say, vocational rehab or a developmental disabilities service provider is going to need is a history, like a medical history. They want to know that this isn't a new program, particularly if you're applying for services that cover people with developmental disabilities. They want to know that this disability occurred before the age of 22. And that's also very important for certain types of Social Security coverage. So the best thing that you can do is to organize all of the educational, psychiatric, and medical sorts of records in a notebook so that you can easily access everything. And then keep that notebook, because every time you may apply for a service or you may apply for renewal of a service, you need to access those documents. So don't just keep them in a pile where they may actually get thrown out, and it's very difficult to organize them into notebooks so that you can, with plastic binders, so that you can find all of these things easily. You'll need records for not only for services, but you also will need records for requesting accommodations in college, in vocational training, and also when somebody goes to college. They need good, strong documentation that they've got a disability. One of the things about, I'm not going to go into what you should be doing in high school, but even for people who are very high functioning with X and Y chromosome variations, many of them need some assistance on a vocational level. So I often recommend that parents, although, the parents in an IEP or a 504 meeting request that their child have a vocational transition piece written into their high school program. It oftentimes isn't done at all if the school district believes that your child is going to be going to college. They'll say, fine, they're going to college. We don't really need to institute transition planning because this child doesn't have a disability that's significant enough. That often comes back to bite the kid later. It's preferable, I think, if even someone who is college bound can have a vocational counseling during high school and can have a file set up for their state vocational rehab office. If they go to college and then they find that they're having difficulty with establishing an employment later, it's often helpful for the vocational rehab agency to know that they opened a file in high school. They won't try to deny you for saying, and say that this is a new problem. One of the things that you need to know about vocational rehab is that it's not set up through the medical services in a state. Each state has its own vocational rehab office, and they're actually funded through the Department of Education, and it's generally federal funds and state matching funds. They offer a lot of services that most people don't anticipate. They can do vocational counseling, they can do testing, they can do neuropsych testing and medical evaluations that will assist the person in getting employment later. They will also pay for vocational training programs, and in a number of states they will pay for college. So that, and they'll usually pay for college at the public college level. So that, obviously they're not going to be picking up Cornell University tuition. But a number of clients that I support have the vocational rehab office in the state paying for their for the person's college education. Yes?
What makes a person eligible for this vocational rehab?
You're eligible for vocational rehab if you have a medical or a psychiatric or a learning disability that makes it difficult for you to obtain employment, that presents a barrier to employment. And you can often show your eligibility for that by using an IEP or by using, triennial testing. If you've been out of school for more than 2 years, then you're going to have to go back, in some cases, and get neuropsych testing. The vocational rehab offices are supposed to authorize neuropsych testing, and many of them will. If they're short on funding, they won't. But that's where you get your notebook of that's where you get your notebook of medical ed documentation and go in with the application.
So you can do your own neuropsych evaluation that you pay on privately.
Yeah, you can do that, because they may well accept that because it will benefit their budget not to have to go and do the testing separately, but they will also do vocational specific testing. But most people are not really aware of the vocational rehab program because it tends to cover people who have more of a physical disability. But with X and Y chromosome variations, not only are there oftentimes learning and cognitive impairments, there are also some very real physical limitations. Because of low muscle tone, a lot of these individuals have difficulty with lifting heavy things. They have difficulty with being able to stand at a job. For instance, stand and work as a cashier for 6 hours. They need special accommodation like being able to sit. They may need the accommodation of being able to work part-time because they become too fatigued after working 4 or 5 hours. Again, the vocational rehab offices are not familiar with X and Y chromosome variations, so grab as many articles as you can and go in with that to the counselor, because the counselor's not going to know about these disorders. One of my goals is to write guidelines for vocational rehab offices so that parents can take it in and show it to the counselor, and they will understand that an X or Y extra X or Y chromosomes are real disabilities, and that there's a constellation of symptoms, both physical and cognitive, that will impair a person's ability, you know, to work.
And what's your time frame for having that done?
Well, I mean, this is something that actually I would like to get it done in the next 18 months, so maybe a year.
And would you put it on the?
It would go on the website so that everybody could access it. Yes. Every state has a different agency. They call them different things, but if you Google, you know, vocational rehabilitation for your state, you'll find, you know, the office, and there are generally a number of different offices. And these are the services that they can help with. They can also be, if they've got enough background, they can also be good in terms of getting workplace accommodations.
Is this something you can do before you're out of high school?
Um,
Or do you wait until
yeah,
after high school?
Actually, in some, I know in New York State they will open a voc rehab. We call it AXYS VR in New York State. They will open a case for you.
Before you're out.
Yeah. So these are independent living centers, and although their focus is often people who are very physically disabled, increasingly they are taking a role in terms of you know, providing resources for people who have things like autism spectrum disorders and disabilities like X and Y chromosome variations. So, well, I'm saying at age 18 you need to consider whether an application for SSI or SSDI is appropriate. And a lot of times when a child is 18, you're not necessarily going to know. They're headed off to college, and you're hoping that they're going to be, you know, that they're going to be able to successfully complete college and then get established in a career. So a lot of parents will delay applying for SSI or SSDI. The reason that age 18 is important is that prior to age 18, a child is only eligible for SSI if the parent's income is very limited. Once a child is 18, he or she is considered his own household, as long as they don't have more than $2,000 in assets. And so the parent's income is not going to be counted once the child is 18. The advantage of having an SSI determination is that it also automatically makes you eligible for Medicaid and for things like food stamp assistance. And the reason that that can be important, not because you may not need health insurance, but Medicaid will fund what's called the Medicaid Waiver services. And those are services like housing, life skills training, and you know, other sorts of supports.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. No, that's okay. This,
So the Medicaid that is for a disabled child living at home, that's before they're
Yeah.
18, would you suggest trying to go ahead and apply for that before they turn 18? Like, is it easier to get approved?
well, actually, for children prior to 18 who are covered by Medicaid, they may be covered because of low income, but if they're being covered through what's called a Medicaid waiver, and that's despite the parent's income, they have to be very, very significantly disabled. What happened? I lost my screen. It just stopped. Well, I'm going to have to go over here and read it. Anyway, if a child is covered by Medicaid prior to age 18, they will probably only be covered if they're very, very significantly disabled. And a lot of kids with X and Y chromosome variations are not going to be disabled enough to be covered. So that could be a waste of time. You'd have to have a child who was, for instance, in and out of the hospital, or had like seizure disorders or something like that in order to be covered by the waiver prior to age 18. The criteria after 18 is very much different than it is for a child. Yeah.
When in your own state, so we happen to be in Georgia.
Yes.
You know, when you apply for these, there are going to be other people that are applying as well that may have more disabilities than our kids.
Yes.
So how do we move up the list, so to speak?
Well, I can't tell you how you move up the list. Are you talking about a waiting list?
No, like for SSDI.
Yes.
You said you applied for that, right? You applied for SSI? Because we're all competing for the same dollars. For all kids with disabilities, we're competing for the same dollars.
Yes.
So either you're eligible or you're not eligible.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of SSI coverage, there is not at this point a waiting list. There is a waiting list for Medicaid waiver services, but in terms of SSI, there is not a waiting list. What you have to do with SSI is to establish eligibility. Okay, as I said, for an individual who's 18 or over, the eligibility is based on their own income and assets, not their families. They can't have more than $2,000 in their own name, so make certain that you've put funds into either an ABLE account or a supplemental needs trust. But they won't be eligible at all if they have $2,000 or more. The standard for applying for either SSI or SSDI is the same, and it's based on whether or not the person can engage in what's called substantial gainful activity. Work and substantial gainful activity in 2017 is defined as being able to work without assistance and without without the assistance, for instance, of a job coach, and earn at least $1,170 a month. Yes?
Sorry, does the 2,000 include retirement accounts?
Yes, it does. So if somebody is an adult and they have retirement accounts and they become disabled early, let's say a lot of the population with X and Y chromosome variations will have health problems that may make it necessary for them to stop working when they're in their 50s. And even if they've had a career and they have retirement accounts, 401ks, for instance, and they apply for, at that point they would probably apply for SSDI. SSDI is not means tested. So when you apply for Social Security disability income based on your own earnings record, you can in fact have retirement accounts and you will not be disqualified because you have assets of over $2,000. So try to remember that SSI is essentially a poverty program, and they will require that your assets be less than $2,000. If you're applying for SSDI because you already have a work history, you will not be means tested. You can have retirement accounts. Yes.
Just a quick question, the $1,170 per month, is that net or gross?
It's gross. So substantial gainful activity is the point of eligibility for everybody regardless of SSDI or SSI. And that's in competitive employment. If, for instance, someone is only able to work in a sort of sheltered workshop or with a one-to-one job coach at all times, and they're earning $1,200 a month, but they've got a job coach with them all the time, they would not be considered to be in competitive employment. I want to also say that college students, just because they're going to college, they're not excluded from being able to apply for SSI. If, in the opinion of the medical providers for them, they would be unable to work and earn at least $1,170, they could become eligible for SSI or SSDI. And that the limitation has to be because of a medical condition. So The application process is, relatively straightforward. You start your application by going to the Social Security, the SSA website, and it's an excellent website. Before you do an application, I would read all the way through the SSA website regarding either SSI or SSDI, depending on your what you're applying for. And you start the application by making a phone call to the 800 number. There's also an electronic questionnaire that you need to complete. That questionnaire takes a very long time. You need to have I talked about a notebook of all your educational and medical records from birth up through now, as comprehensively as you can do it. You may not have pediatric, early childhood reports, but try to make sure that you've got that karyotype or that microarray report regarding the genetic condition, and then try to have as many evaluations as you can in that notebook, because you're going to need it when you do the application. The application you either do online or you may do it at the Social Security office. And it's helpful to be able to pull out the notebook when you're completing the application online or when you're talking with someone in the Social Security office, so that you have all of your educational and healthcare providers available at your fingertips, because you have to provide the names, the specialties, the telephone number, and the address for all of these people, because they're going to be sent questionnaires about your child's functioning. Yes?
Is this assuming you have either legal guardianship or power of attorney over your child? Because if they turn 18, would I be able to be doing all this?
Well, you can do it with your child. You probably should sign both. You should probably sign both health care and financial power of attorney with your child, so that you can do all of these things. So sort of on their behalf.
Right, otherwise she would be having to
Yeah.
on her behalf. She wouldn't.
If you're applying for SSI for a young adult, they wouldn't be qualified if they could do the whole application themselves.
Right.
So, the application process is, and then the other thing is, when you are answering questions and completing questionnaires regarding functioning level, a parent wants to provide sort of the best picture of their child. Don't do it. Don't talk about how well the child functions on their best day. Talk about how they function on their worst day, and portray your child that way for the application. It's very difficult to do as a parent, but if you don't do that, then they're going to appear to be too sort of high functioning. Another thing that it's very important for people to understand when you're applying for someone who has an X or Y chromosome variation is that none of these genetic signatures are considered what are called listed impairments. Social Security has a whole list of what are called automatic disability conditions, and they might include spina bifida, intractable seizures, stage 4 such and such cancer, and Klinefelter syndrome is not listed. They do not recognize Klinefelter syndrome or Trisomy X or even 49XXXXY as an automatically qualifying impairment. What you have to do is to demonstrate that there are enough comorbid conditions associated with this that the functioning level is equivalent to someone with a listed impairment. So what you need to do is to pull in any psychiatric, developmental, or physical impairments that impact on being able to engage in substantial gainful activity. So these are some examples of comorbid disabling conditions that you have to document with medical records and medical or educational records. So, and all of these slides are going to be on the website, so you don't actually have to take pictures. You'll be able to get these. So what you want to do is to put in the strongest application that you can the first time around, because while I think 45% of or 55% of applications are rejected on the first round, 45% of them are not. The other thing that it's very necessary to have is don't provide a neuropsych evaluation that is 4 years old. Try to have a neuropsych evaluation that was done within the last year, and make sure that the person who does the evaluation understands that you're going to be applying for Social Security disability with it, either Social Security disability or SSI. It would be very, very helpful if you did one of the evaluations at one of the specialty clinics, because all of the neuropsychologists associated with the specialty clinics for X and Y chromosome variations know how to describe the variation in a manner that people will understand that we're dealing with a whole constellation of symptoms, a multitude of symptoms that equal essentially a listed impairment, and they can put that in their language. If you're rejected, don't reapply, because if you need to file an appeal instead, and if you file an appeal and you're successful, the eligibility and the benefits will go back to the date that you filed the initial application. The other thing is that I recommend that if you're rejected that you go to an attorney, because they can always take your documentation. They can tell you where it's weak, where you need more testing, where you need, say, a better, you may need a different physician giving advice. But what you want to do is an appeal, and you have to file the appeal within 90 days. Yes?
If you're accepted after that, what happens, like, 5 years later, or do you still need to, are they going to ask you to show proof that you still?
Well, yes, actually, somebody who's relatively high functioning, and most of these, these men and women are, they'll probably be reevaluated every 1.5 to 3 years for, because a number of them, in fact, will get training. They'll go into a job coaching supported position, and eventually be able to get off, and may be able to get off disability, but you will be reevaluated. The benefits vary greatly by state, because some of the states supplement the benefits, but they generally are somewhere in the neighborhood of $460 to $807 a month. That's for SSI. If you're applying for SSDI, it's going to be, the benefits will be based on the work history, or in some cases, children will be eligible for coverage under their parents' Social Security under their parents' Social Security work history, and then their benefits are dependent on their parents' previous earning. But I'm not going to go into that because it's far too technical. There's also an income incentive in the SSI program. If your people can work, and they can work up to about 24 hours a week, and their benefit will be decreased by about $1 for every $2 that they earn. There's a slight variation, but there is a work benefit built in to the program, so they don't have to stay out of the workforce once they have either SSI or SSDI. This is just a slide on getting SSDI based on a parent's or an individual's work history. We did not apply for SSI for our son until he was 22, and he was going to college, he was trying to work. It then became apparent that he really was not going to be able to support himself. So we, at that point, went back, and he had a number of failed work attempts. We had very good documentation, and in fact wound up getting SSI on the first application. So he has been on SSI for several years. When my husband then filed for Social Security, his eligibility automatically transferred from SSI to SSDI. He was getting about, I don't know, $750 a month. And as soon as he went on to SSDI, based on my husband's earning record, his monthly income went up to, I think, $1150 a month. So that will often happen with people who are getting SSI and the parents retire. As soon as you retire, Social Security has all the family records in one place, and they will say, I see that you have a child who's getting SSI, we're going to transfer him or her to SSDI. And there is some application to do. It often involves a small increase in benefits. There is a redetermination. It's periodic, every 18 months to 3 years. You have to file medical, medical reports, and the person may have to come in for an interview. Social Security also has the right to ask that person to be evaluated by their own physician. That's kind of scary, because their own physician may know absolutely nothing about X or Y chromosome variations. So that is a difficult, that's a difficult part. What I would do, again, is to have recent evaluations and to try to find some of the excellent summary articles that Dr. Tartaglia and others have done on X and Y chromosome variations and bring it into the review. Medicaid coverage will automatically come with SSI eligibility, and that if in fact your child also has significant either mental health or developmental disability issues, you may be able to access what are called Medicaid waiver services. Those are adult services that are, and they're they're funded by the state. Each state applies for what's called a Medicaid waiver, so that they can use Medicaid to fund services like housing, life skills training, more intensive job coaching, and other types of services. There are some states where there are no waiting lists for the Medicaid waiver. Most states have a waiting list. So if in fact you've gotten SSI and coverage and you've gotten Medicaid and you think that your child is going to be eligible and is going to need more services, like somebody to help them live on their own in an apartment, somebody to help them manage the money when you're not able to do it anymore, it's a good idea to go onto the website and get onto the waiting list for the Medicaid waiver. There are some states where there is no waiting list. Currently, there's no waiting list in, say, New Jersey and New York and Massachusetts. Unfortunately, people are moving to some of those states because they know there's no waiting list. But the Medicaid then funds those services, and they can fund them for life. And it will, in fact, John is, I think we applied for what's called Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities Services, and it did take us about a year to get in there. But once in, he was able to get what's called the Medicaid Service Coordinator, and he is now on the Medicaid waiver. He's relatively high functioning, so he doesn't get a lot of services. They determine your budget based on, how independent the person is. But he does have help with money management, with shopping, and with shopping, he gets a rent supplement to help him with the costs of his apartment. And basically, he would not be able to live away from us if he didn't have these Medicaid waiver services. They're so state specific that it's probably not. I think I put this particular talk together when I was speaking with New York City parents. The IQ and functioning levels are individual to each state. There are also mental health programs. They will not cover somebody who just has some depression. It has to be really what they call, the standard is usually severe and persistent, but they will also help with housing, with life skills training, with say medication, making sure that somebody's taking their medication. The point of it is to keep the person from having to be rehospitalized. Additional benefits that you may or may not be eligible for, depending on your state, would be SNAP, what they used to call food stamps, and those eligibility for that is generally income dependent. So if somebody is only working half-time and they're on minimum wage and they're living in an apartment, they may well be eligible for SNAP. Housing assistance is very difficult to get. Those are Section 8 vouchers, and as far as I know, the federal government has not released any additional Section 8 money for 4 years. There's general assistance that is available in some states. It's usually quite limited, but and it's generally temporary. It's usually limited to no more than 5 years, but that is another thing that people may be able to apply for.